Hello, this is Nick Freitas, and welcome back to Making the Argument, Gun Edition. That's right. We're going to talk about the Second Amendment today. And the reason why we're going to talk about it is because the same politicians that generally run saying things like, nobody wants to take your guns. Well, they're in power now, and it turns out, guess what? They do want to take your guns. They want to take lots of your guns. Individuals having a right to own firearms is necessary not only for their security, it's necessary for a free society. It's necessary for a free state to be able to protect a free state from tyranny. If you don't actually look at the historical context and the reasons for why that first portion of the Second Amendment was put in there, then you are going to miss something, because ultimately, human nature doesn't change. There is a self-destructive nature about humanity that we're trying to hold at bay. And one of the ways that the founders sought to do that within the Second Amendment was to recognize that individual gun ownership is a stopgap against tyranny. It's how free societies remain free. And again, this goes back to that whole philosophical argument that as a free person, you have an inherent right to be able to defend yourself. Even in the midst of trying to take your guns, they're not sitting here going, we're going to take your guns, right? I mean, at least Beto O'Rourke was honest about it. Politicians believe that if they say common sense in front of whatever they want to do next, it automatically makes it common sense, right? No need to actually provide a coherent argument. As long as they add the word common sense in front of something, it's common sense. Just like if they add the word justice onto something, it automatically achieves just results. But when they talk about universal background checks, that's because that sounds a whole lot better than what they're actually trying to get at, which is universal gun registration. Do you think it's a good idea for the government, right? The only entity in the country that is allowed to use aggressive legal force. Do you really think it's a good idea for them to know what guns everybody in the country owns? And if you do, well, then here's what I'd like you to consider. This has been done before, and this has been done before in some pretty oppressive regimes. But in places like Australia, they started off, well, we're going to have universal gun registration, right? Because that's common sense. Well, what happened next? Confiscation laws. What they want is to get guns out of the hands of citizens, not criminals, because they can't wait to let criminals out of jail early. An assault weapon is essentially that anything that looks scary. It's dangerous because you're making it incredibly difficult for a law-abiding citizen to own like just a standard small arm, a standard rifle, a standard pistol, right? A standard shotgun. The next one is they talk about high capacity magazines. So what's a high capacity magazine? Well, apparently it's anything more than 10 rounds. So basically you're criminalizing millions of magazines out there. In Virginia, they actually had a bill where it would have been a class 1 misdemeanor to have a magazine over 12 rounds. Or to give you an idea, what that means is that for every magazine that you have, and typically when someone goes and buys a pistol, look at 2 magazines, you could spend up to 2 years in jail because you have those 2 magazines, right? Because that's going to make us safer. Well done, sir. Let's look at other states where they've actually banned them. They did this in California. How did it work out? Well, it turns out there was no discernible difference with a lot of the gun laws that they put in place, to include things like high-capacity magazines. No discernible difference. Now what they're trying to do is they're turning on the manufacturers. If they can't stop the demand, because it turns out that free people like to be able to defend themselves. If they can't stop the demand, well, then they're going to hurt the supply. I mean, my gosh, Louisville Slugger, you're in trouble because it turns out bats are used to kill more people than AR-15s in this country. The other reason why this makes me so angry and so frustrated is because at the same time they are telling law-abiding citizens, we are going to make it significantly more difficult for you to be able to own a firearm, they have parole boards that are letting violent criminals out. I'm not talking about a marijuana charge, right? Look, you legalize marijuana for all I care. I'm talking about people that, in one case here in Virginia, just recently, a parole board released somebody that executed a police officer. And when he got out and was asked if he had any regrets, he said no. Because out of the 40,000 gun deaths, and yes, that is a horrific number, out of the 40,000 gun deaths, over 60% of them are suicides. And that is tragic. And there are a number of ways that we should make sure that we come alongside and help people that are dealing with suicide. Because you've been instituting these policies now for decades, one might think you would have some bang-up results to show us. But you don't. It's just the opposite. On Making the Argument, we really try, I really do try to make a calm, cool, collected argument, but I am so fed up with this because I'm tired of being lied to. I don't know why they are so terrified of their law-abiding constituents being able to defend themselves. I don't know why they're so terrified, but I'm starting to become a lot more skeptical about their motives and their intentions. You wouldn't know this, but for a long period of US history, some of the strictest and most arbitrary gun laws were actually in the Jim Crow South. And it was specifically because they wanted the Klan to be able to have guns, but they didn't want black people to be able to have guns.